Let's talk to Peter Hitchens, who has written a piece about how you should never have trusted Keir Starmer. Why would you believe a word he says now? Peter, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
I mean, I said yesterday to an assembled panel that I was working with, does anybody want to predict what Keir Starmer is going to suggest tomorrow? And none of them wanted to, because it was so random the way he's behaving. And even if we tried, I don't think we'd have come up with chemical castration.
No, but it's not really a big surprise when you see it, is it? I've always suspected that when capital punishment is reintroduced in this country, which I think ultimately it will be in a spasm of hopeless rage, it will be reintroduced by a government of the left seeking some kind of popular support. This is the most straightforward populism you've ever seen.
Yeah.
And it takes me back to the Blair days of tough on crime, supposedly tough on the causes of crime, education, education, education. All those slogans, which they constantly repeated to try and persuade us that they were interested in the things that worried us. Well, all the time in the background, they were turning the police into a politically correct thought police. They were creating a Supreme Court which would suck power out of Parliament. And they were getting us as deep as they possibly could into the European Union and constantly engaging us in crazy foreign wars in which the public had no interest. That was their real policy, but they covered it up with what is called manipulative populism. That is to say, the constant shouting of slogans about things which they think the public like.
Right.
And of course, they now claim to be effectively controlling migration and all the other things. None of it is true, and the whole thing is entirely fraudulent. But the problem is that it does sometimes work, and I wouldn't be entirely surprised if it didn't work on some people. But in the background of it lies the immutable fact that they simply haven't got any money.
Yeah,
there really isn't any money. We are as I understand it, still borrowing money to pay interest on our debts, which is of course the sign of someone who.
Well, I don't know if you saw the breaking news this morning. 20.2 billion borrowed last month alone. And if you consider when they came into power that they kept bleating on about a £22 billion black hole, they practically borrowed that in 1 month.
Well, I think they've gone to the Bamfords at JCB and asked for a machine to dig a bigger black hole for them to climb into. This is a government which is fundamentally a black hole. It's a mental black hole, it's a financial black hole, it's a policy black hole.
Yeah.
But that's what people, I'm afraid to say, voted for, against my strong advice when the chance was there not to do so. And you've got it. I hope you're enjoying it, all of you who voted for it.
Yeah, I don't think they are, funnily enough. And in fact,
well, then, sorry, then all I can say is tough. One of the great things about being me is that I can spend an awful lot of my time, and one of my principal pleasures saying, okay, well, I told you so. Yeah. And I can enjoy that, which they won't.
Most frequently used phrase by Peter Hitchens. Is that
absolutely
definitely it?
And most frequently used because so many occasions are given to me for saying it.
Yeah, but I think, I mean, you know, I take your point about the Blair regime being similar, but they were cleverer than this lot, weren't they? Because
they were cleverer.
They didn't look like they were a chaotic government. This looks chaotic.
They were cleverer. And they were slicker and they were more cunning and they'd spent more time preparing for it. Yes, this lot thought that they could basically do the same thing and get away with it. And they're finding it more difficult. On the other hand, look at the Conservative Party. For goodness sake.
Yeah.
It really isn't much of a threat to them.
No.
And then we have what New Labour never had to put up with, which is Nigel Farage. And what's really taking place here is that Labour is adapting to the existence of Nigel Farage by stealing as many of his policies or his apparent policies as it can get away with. And the cynicism of this is so astonishing. And this is what I was trying to point out when I wrote about Keir Starmer the other day, that it is absolutely astounding that these people who have spent years and years and years defaming anybody who was against mass immigration as a Nazi, then taking on this policy which they had been defaming themselves. There isn't even a spark, a tiny little trace of principle in any of this behaviour. It's total desperation.
Yeah.
We want to be in office so much. There is nothing we will not say or do. No position we will not adopt, which we have scorned in the past. Absolutely nothing. And when you get to this stage, the danger is, of course, it is quite funny watching people contorting themselves in this fashion. But the problem is that in the end, it empties the wells of trust. In a society where politicians cannot be believed and are openly exposing themselves as being totally without principle, as well as being totally without money, the end result is utter public disillusion, and this growing desire, which you find in the polls, particularly among the young, for a less democratic and government and a stronger state, which looks appealing from a distance, but which experience close to is actually, I promise you, very unpleasant. And that's the danger, that we get rid of what has up till now been a relatively civilized, vaguely democratic and more or less free country, and turn it, as I say, into a strong state which does actually start castrating paedophiles.
Yeah.
And then when that starts happening, people will begin to realise that they live in a different sort of world from the one that they were brought up in.
Yes, quite. And we'll come back to that whole idea in a minute. But how about this for a bit of breaking news? The government has temporarily been banned from concluding its negotiations on the Chagos Islands deal by an injunction granted in the early hours of today by a High Court judge. Now, I don't know who's put that injunction on them, but that's another blow for Keir Starmer, who's been wrestling with this Chagos Islands deal for pretty much the whole time he's been in government. They were about to sign it virtually, apparently, in the next day or so. But the breaking news today that they've been banned from concluding the negotiations by a High Court injunction. So we watch this with interest.
Are we governed in this country by judges or by government? I must confess that my brain, not merely my brain, my entire body glazes over when I try to think about the Chagosian problem. I don't understand it, and I can't bring myself to care about it. But obviously, this High Court judge has gone into it, and he said the government policy is wrong. So that again is quite funny. This, of course, is the party which did most, I think, to make judges more important.
Yes.
Government of the country.
So there's a bit of payback for at least those of us who don't like...
I don't know. As I say, if I cared more about it, I'd go into it in more depth.
Yes.
What I do say is that on this is one thing on which Jeremy Corbyn was absolutely right. The way in which the Chagosian Islanders were treated when they were chucked out of their homes to make way for this enormous airbase at Diego Garcia was and remains a disgrace. And I think anybody who knows anything about it looks and thinks, well, if anything that can be done to better their position, then great. But I don't know whether this deal does. It probably doesn't.
No, I mean, my understanding from most of the Chagosians that I've spoken to is that they would rather like the place to remain British. They would quite like to remain with the ability to come to this country. But of course, when they did come to this country to argue their case, they ended up sort of sleeping at the airport because they weren't allowed any sort of proper immigration status because of the fact that they hadn't sought permission to come here. So they had this sort of irony of people coming in on small boats from all sorts of countries who could be given hotel rooms, but the Chagosians weren't able to go anywhere.
Well, isn't that so typical? It is one of the bigger blots, I think, on the history of our country, the way we treated people who didn't deserve to be treated in that way at all. And it is a pity, isn't it, in a way, that it's the fringe of politics where their case gets taken up rather than in the middle.
It is a pity. Let's just go back to what you were saying earlier about the death penalty, though. Why do you think that the death penalty will eventually be brought back in? Because I thought that when I saw, I didn't get a chance to read the piece, but when I saw the thing popping up, I thought you were arguing for a reason to bring the death penalty back.
Well, I do believe in principle that we should have it, but in the current state of our courts, where you have teenagers on the jury and majority verdicts, and where the trials have become increasingly emotional and less factual, I wouldn't trust our justice system to get me a cup of coffee, let alone to decide whether someone lived or died. You'd have to have huge reforms of the justice system, and indeed our police, who we've discussed many times here, before I would think it could, either the police or the courts could be trusted to actually find and accurately convict a murderer. So you can't have capital punishment unless you're really, really very sure indeed that you're killing the right person. So that rules it out for me. In general theory, I think it is a necessary part of a serious punitive justice system. If you believe that people should be punished for doing things that are wrong, then murder has to have a special penalty attached to it. But leaving that aside, the death penalty tends now to be used by countries which are using it for political reasons, to placate public rage against the fact that they don't feel safe in their homes and on their streets. I think an awful lot of people in our country are increasingly feeling unsafe in their homes and on their streets because they're unpoliced and because the law is so weak. And a populist government of the left is more likely. This nearly happened in South Africa a few years ago, remember, under the African National Congress. There was a strong pressure to reintroduce capital punishment there, which nearly came to something as far as I could see. But that you will get this happening, but without any of the necessary safeguards and restraints, which actually make it workable and, as I believe, civilized. So I don't I'm not against it. I think it's crazy to disarm yourself in the face of violent bullying in your society, but you have to use it with very, very serious safeguards, or the danger of it going wrong is huge.
Absolutely, and given Lucy Connolly's case and the fact that she's still languishing on a nearly 3-year sentence for writing something on social media, you wouldn't...
Goodness, this is again an area where I don't fit. I'm afraid I think that there is a problem with Lucy Connolly. It's a very interesting long piece in the Daily Mail about
Yes, I've seen it, yeah.
I commend to people because it's a lot of hard work's gone into it, and what she actually said in the initial tweet was appalling.
Oh, there's no question about that, and there's no question.
I think we have to accept this.
Yeah, we do, but we don't have to accept that she needs, therefore, to be sent to prison for 31 months on the basis of the fact that she needs to be taught a lesson. And I think there is perfectly, you can make as many arguments as you want that the law allows for this, and that's what the judge did. But you know, the fact is that the circumstances are that she was told plead guilty and you will get a lesser sentence. That turned out not to be true. She had a chance to appeal the case. So that was turned down. I think people in this country will say, okay, fine, lock you up for 6 months, lock you up for 9 months even, but to lock somebody up for that length of time when people who do many other much more serious crimes don't get that kind of sentence, shows you there's something wrong.
That's surely allowing it for locking up the people who do the more serious crimes.
Yes,
rather than
but we have to live in the world that we've created rather than
a rather nasty piece of incitement.
Yeah, right. But the point is that it's yes, of course. But
I don't want TCA justice. I think that there are a lot of other people who should have gone to jail as well. But I think that and I'm sorry about Lucy Connolly's personal life and all the rest of it, as everybody is, but that really has to be her concern. She didn't have to send out that tweet.
No, she didn't have to, but she didn't have to plead guilty either. But she was advised to plead guilty, and there's a pretty good chance that if she hadn't pleaded guilty, there would have been a trial, and she might not have had to go to prison. And that's the unfortunate reality of the justice system that we have.
Well, it's always complicated, isn't it? The judgment on whether to plead guilty and what advice you get from your lawyers and things like that. Yeah. I won't go into that because I don't possess the details, but I don't think the argument is not for me so much as Lucy Connolly should be immediately freed, which I don't happen to think is necessarily the case. The argument is should other people be being seriously punished for things which they're getting away with. And that I very much believe.
Very much so, particularly given the reality, again, which is that they're going to be releasing an awful lot of people out of the prison system because there simply isn't room for them. And yet she's still being held.
Shall I tell you that when Roy Jenkins eviscerated our criminal justice system in the 1960s, there were about fewer than 42,000 people in prison in England and Wales.
Yeah.
And he said if it went up beyond that figure, it would be disastrous. They couldn't cope. Well, no, it's gone far beyond that figure now. It was actually bizarrely the weakening of our justice system which filled up the jails, because what happened was that people didn't, for the most part, experience prison until they had already become habitual criminals, by which time it was useless to restrain them. And that's what we have. If you hit prison for a second offence, which would seem to me to be, in most cases, the point at which you would go to prison, then I think you'd find we have a much smaller jail population and much less crime. But because we sit around giving out fines that aren't paid, community service that doesn't get done, suspended sentences that are never activated, over and over again. Many people, I would guess, have probably committed, some of them even undetected or unreported or unregistered, 20 or 30 offences before they ever get within range of prison.
Yes.
It's much harder to get into prison in this country than it is to get into university.
And all of which feeds into what I was saying, that, it looks as though Lucy Connolly was singled out for this particular treatment. But there we are. Listen, I've got to run. Peter, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Peter Hitchens,